Okay, this is the video to accompany the lock-in session. This is equations and inequalities. So equations are things with an equal sign, and our inequalities are our greater than or equal to, less than or equal to. And in this section, we're going to look at solving linear equations, solving quadratics, systems of equations, inequalities, and we'll take extra questions if we have time. So section 1, linear equations. This is things that have a y and an x in, but basically no exponents. So when we type in graphs of this form, they're all going to be straight line graphs. So normally we write y equals mx plus b. So m, your number in front of the x, is the slope, and then your number at the end is the y-intercept. Now there are other straight lines as well, but that's certainly one way. So if we want to solve an equation like you can see here, 3x minus 6 equals 0, then all we're actually going to do is we're just going to literally type in the question. And notice that it draws a line for us here. And if we click on that intercept, it actually will tell you what the answer is. The answer is 2. If you wanted to check that answer, 3 times 2 is 6. Take away 6 is indeed 0. So you can see that that's the right answer. Now, if you have a question where, so this is the question at the top. If you type the question in, but it's using a different variable besides x, notice it gives you this little warning sign here, and it says we only support implicit equations. So the instructions say change the a to an x. And we don't see anything straight away, but remember, we're only between -10 and 10. It might be that the answer is bigger than that. So if we zoom out, then you can actually see what the answer is here. So for questions like this, it doesn't really matter whether they give us multiple choice answers or not. We're easily going to be able to find out what they are. Now, we originally learned how to do these by hand, but you're probably just going to use Desmos now. But for those of you who want to know, remember how to do it by hand and then check later. We're basically doing opposites. So the line means divide. So instead of dividing by 2, you would multiply by 2. Distributive rule here. And then once we have got rid of all the parentheses, we just try and bring all our letters to one side and numbers to the other side, but by doing opposites. So this is positive 4a, so you do negative 4a. That would cancel on this side. 3 take away 4 is -1, and a positive 6 we just write as 6. And then instead of adding 20, you would take away 20 to give you -14, and then divide both sides by -1 to give you a is 14. I think you will agree that's probably easier just to type in the question and then just click on the x-intercept. But make sure you're typing it in correctly, because if you mistype it, clearly you'll get a different answer. Now, there are some special cases as well. So sometimes they will actually just give examples of a number equals a number, and you have to say what that means. So basically, you're asking yourself, does 5 equal 3? So clearly the answer is no. Therefore, the answer would be no solution. And basically, you're just looking for different numbers. Whereas it does 2 equal 2, well, yes, it does. So that one's clearly not no solution. This one will be infinite solution. 2 is always equal to 2. So when you have the same numbers, that's an example of infinite solutions. I think I did a double click there. Let me just go back. So if you have one of those questions, and you might not know it straight away. So 2x equals 2x plus 5, like I typed it in here. Now I don't see it, so you might just want to zoom out just to look. See, I don't see it at all. Let me click back on home again. So when that happens, split it into 2. Type the one on the left-hand side of the equal sign and the one on the right-hand side of the equal sign on separate lines. And then look what actually happens. So for this, notice that these two lines do not cross each other, and therefore you would say no solutions. So when you get parallel lines, you would put no solutions for this. If you end up with just the same line, then you would put infinite solution, and we'll see that one on the next one. So 3x plus 6 equals 3 parentheses x plus 2. You can zoom out. You're not going to see anything because it's one of those special cases. Hopefully you can see here 3 times x is 3x and 3 times 2 is 6. So these are actually identical. Sometimes it won't be as obvious as that. And then when I type in both equations, look what happens. Now, this time I don't see 2 lines, I only see 1 line. But look what happens when I switch off the second line and then switch it back on again. You can actually see that these are identical lines here. So when you get the same line, that would be infinite solutions. So just quickly to go back, if we split it up into 2 and we have parallel lines, then you're going to say no solution. And if you have to split it into 2 lines and it's the same line, you would put infinite solutions. And obviously the easiest case of all is when you just type it in and you see the vertical line, and then obviously you can just answer that question straight away there. So there was some for people to try here. So solve this one here. Now it's already been typed in. So this is really just to check, is it one of those special cases or is it just where we don't see the answer? So I'm zooming out. Yep, don't see it. So I'm just going to type in each side of the equation. So we'll type in that one. Look where it is. And then we'll type in the second one. And you can see that this is parallel. So this would be our no solution question. So we want to slide 11. So a couple to try here. Let me just check. Oops, I guess it helps if I switch the line on first. Ah, there it is. Whoops. Did forget to switch the picture on. And actually the intercept for this one is 0. So 0 is the answer for this question. So 0 is a perfectly good answer. Doesn't mean no solution. It just means that 0 is an answer. So if you'd ask me how many private yachts I own, the answer would be 0. So 0 is a perfectly good answer to a question. All right, next one. It is switched on. So let's just have a little look. See if I can see it by zooming out. Nope, don't see it. So I'm going to split this into two, and I'm actually going to be a little bit lazy here. I'm just going to type in the right-hand side, and then for the other one, I'm just going to delete the right-hand side. Let's have a look. This one's not so clear. I think these are the same line, but mine being colorblind, they're kind of, I can see a little change here. Do you see this part at the bottom here? So yes, these are identical lines. Therefore, this would be an infinite solutions one. And we can actually see a little clearer here because we have the answers. So that one was our no solution. This one was the 0. And this one was the same line. Therefore, it was infinite solutions. All right, section 2 is on quadratic equations. Certainly make sure you know the words roots, solutions, x-intercepts, and zeros. They're all the same thing. So when we see a picture, that's exactly what we're going to look like for. So solve x squared minus 10x minus 24. This is supposed to say equal to 0, really, but hey, we'll leave that right now. So as we type this in, we look for the x-intercepts. So we look here. If we click, you can actually see what the answers are, -2 and 12. And that's literally all we're doing when we're actually solving those equations. Now, if it asks for what are the zeros, then that's just the same question. You just look for the x-intercepts. What are the solutions? What are the x-intercepts? What are the roots? All those words mean the same, so you're just going to type them in, and you're just going to look where does it cross the x-axis. Now, factoring is going to be covered in another section, but you would use a similar method. You would type it in, look at the two numbers, but then you would do the opposites. So where it says -2, you would have a +2. Where it says 12, you would have -12. And actually, if you typed this into Desmos, you can see that it's actually the same curve as what this is. And that's also a very good check for you while you're doing those questions. So sometimes they actually ask you to draw on the actual screen itself rather than a multiple choice. So plot the solutions to this. So I recognize solutions is just that word for x-intercepts. So I would click here, and I would click here. But this is certainly one of those technology enhanced questions where they can ask you to click on the screen. Don't click up here. This is just the y-intercept. So unless it says plot all the intercepts, then you don't include the y-intercept specifically. But make sure you're reading questions carefully. Similarly, if it says plot the roots, you would do the same thing. Plot the zeros, same thing, or plot the x-intercepts. And then you can see those down there as well. So use the Desmos calculator on the next slide. They did suggest that people practice this question. Identify the solutions to the equation 5x squared minus 7x minus 6 equals 0. And then we got some multiple choice answers. Now for speed, I actually already typed this in. And notice this time we actually have two vertical lines. So let's look to see what they are. We have -0.6. So let me write that down. And 2. So let me put that on the next one. Now, we can go back and look, but normally they ask us to do fractions. They do, but actually I can already tell the answer. The answer said 2. This is the only one that has a 2 in it, so I'm pretty sure it's already D. But sometimes that won't always be true. Notice next to the decimal, we have the fraction to decimal button here, and that does actually show you that it's -3/5. So that can be really useful when that happens. Now, just be aware, sometimes when you click on something, it won't always give you exactly the right answer. So sometimes it rounds this to 3 decimal places. So if you clicked on here and it said 0.66, just be aware that's not actually the right answer. And actually, in reality, it's probably going to say 0.667. So as it rounds to 3 decimal places, really it was a 6, and then it rounded this up to a 7. What we have to do is, oh, look, this is a pattern here, 0.666. Keep going with the sixes, keep going, and eventually we get the fraction symbol here, and you can actually see that it's 2/3, which is not the same as what it originally appeared to be when we looked at Desmos. So just make sure that you realize they're not always exactly the same for this one. Now, if you see 0.333, it will give you a fraction, but that's actually the wrong fraction. It rounded, so keep going, and then eventually you will find out that the fraction is 1/3. Sometimes easier than that is to do the question in reverse. Look at all the multiple choice answers, type them in, and it will actually change them to a decimal, and then you can find the one that's closest to your answer. Hey, what are the zeros of this? So we know that just means the same thing. We're just going to look for the intercepts. What are the zeros? So they did say that people often forget the word zeros when they're doing these questions. So I typed one of these in here. Let me have a click. Negative 0.8, 0.8. And if we're not sure what those are, we can just go ahead and type them in. They are negative 4/5 and positive 4/5. And for my other question, let me go ahead and switch that one on. We click on those roots. So negative 0.5, we probably recognize that one as negative 1/2. And there's that 0.667. So really it's 666. Keep going. And then you can see the answer is 2/3. So identify the solutions. Oh, here we go. Here were the answers. I actually clicked on them just to make them a little bit easier for when we go through this in class. Now, one other thing with factoring as well that's really useful, I mentioned the fact earlier, if you type in the answer, you can kind of check if the pictures actually match up with each other. So if you saw this question and you saw these multiple choice answers, first of all, I didn't type A, I actually typed X, so it would draw them. But notice how you can see two distinct curves here. One of them is the question and one of them is the answer. So the fact that they're not the same tells you that these two things are not the same. And clearly for part B, you can see these are not the same. And for part D, you can see two curves. But look on C. Answer C, you only see one curve. And the reason is this is exactly the same as this. Therefore, when you graph them, you would have the same answer. So that's a really useful technique as well that you can use for the SOL. Let's move on to systems. That's when you have two equations and two unknowns. And you're just going to look where the graphs intersect. So type them into Desmos. Look for the two lines. If you don't see where they intersect, zoom out until you do. And there's your answer, 5 and negative 1. That means that x is 5 and y is negative 1. If you wanted to substitute in to check on this, 3 times 5 is 15. 5 times negative 1 is negative 5. And 15 and negative 5 is indeed 10. 2 times 5 is 10. 3 times negative 1 is negative 3. 10 take away negative 3 is 13. That's why that's the answer. But clearly, it's much easier just to type them into Desmos and just look for that intersection. Sometimes it doesn't ask you for the whole solution, it just asks you for one of the values. So this is typed in, I kind of zoomed in a lot here. What is the x value? So once you've found the intersection, just focus on the x value. Or if it says what is the y value, you could just say negative 9. What appears to be the closest x value to the solution, so sometimes I'll give you the picture but not the equations, then you're just going to take a reading. So you can see this is the x-axis. So read down to the x-axis. And although there's no scale here, you can see this is 10. So 1, 2, 3. It clearly goes up in ones here. So this would be negative 1. So the three things, they'll either intersect, and if they do, you're just going to look for the y-intercept. You'll just, the intersection, and you'll just click on it really, and it'll tell you what it is. If you have parallel lines, then that actually means that there's no solution to that question. So you just put no solution. Kind of like when we split it into two sections earlier when we were doing linear equations. And if you only see one line, because it's the same line, then you're going to put infinite solutions just like we did earlier. Here's a practice if you want to check to find which one has no real solutions. So the word real, and kind of we just mentioned no solution here. Same thing. So no solutions. This means these will be parallel, and you could just type them in. So here was the answer choice A, and you can see that these cross, so that would not be answer choice A. Here was answer choice B, Same thing, you can see that those intersect, so it's not that. Here is answer choice C. And there we go. These ones look parallel. You might have to zoom out just to confirm. Yeah, they're definitely parallel. So answer C certainly looks like no solution. And D, you can see, does intersect, so it wouldn't be answer D. So answer C would be our answer for that question. So you just literally have to type, but just make sure you do it accurately. Our inequalities. I always like to remind people that less than, notice how it points to the left, and both of these begin with the letter L. That's often a good way in case people forget. I know people talk about the crocodile when they're in elementary school, but they might not necessarily remember what that means. So here's an example. Solve this question. We have 4 multiple choice answers. So as we type in the picture here, notice a couple of features. One, we're looking for that x-intercept again, so -4. So I know it's neither of these two answers. And also we're looking which side of the line is shaded. So as you shade to the right, that means that I would pick the one that points to the right as well. Now, there is a couple of extra features on this. First of all, notice that it's not always the direction in the question. So although this says less than, our final answer is actually greater than. Notice also on here the dotted line as well. So when we have a dotted line, we don't have an equal sign here. If I was to change this into one with an equal sign, notice how this line changes into a solid line as well. So sometimes they can have those questions as well, just to make sure that you know the difference between those things. Of course, if I add in an equal sign to this one and then graph it, you can actually see the solid line here. So you would know that that's wrong because on the original picture, I only saw a dotted line. Oops, I just added an extra little thing there. Also, if they ask you to graph this on a line, then this is where we do the open circle and the closed circle. So the open circle like this is when we don't have an equal sign. And if we had an equal sign, then you draw a closed circle, which is basically this just colored in. If we're asked to graph an inequality like this, then we're just going to go ahead and use Desmos. And we're just going to look for some key points that actually lie on this line. If you can, try and focus on the intercepts as well. So 2.5 and 5. And then you just look at the pictures to see which is the closest to that. So there was 5. This one was like 2.5. And then you could just join this up. If it asked you to draw it, most likely it's just going to ask you which is the closest picture to this. Now, I missed one other thing from here, so let me just go back. I actually drew a solid line when really it should have been a dotted line, and I forgot to do the shading as well. So just make sure you're paying a little attention. I don't have a feature on here to draw the dotted line, unfortunately. Checking if something are solutions. So here's our equation. Basically, if it's in the shaded region, the answer is yes, it's a solution. If it's not in the shaded region, the answer is no. If it lies on the line, it depends on which type of line it is. So if it's a solid line, then you would accept it. And if it's a dotted line, then no, you do not accept it. So as I type in each answer, notice that the line is in the shaded region, so I would accept it. Notice x equals 8 is not in the shaded region, so I wouldn't accept that answer. And x equals 7, you can see, is exactly on the line, but as it's a dotted line, that means I would not count that answer. As we move on to linear graphs like this, same idea. Once we've got each coordinate, we take a look. So if it's not in the shaded region, then we do not count it. If it's on the line, we have to check. So this is a solid line. So yes, I would count this solution. And the last point you can see is inside the shaded region. So I would select both of these. Sometimes they'll give you a list and ask you to select all the ones that are valid solutions. As we get onto systems, you'll notice that there's 3 parts now. So we've got our 2 lines, 3 parts that are shaded. We're going to focus on the part that is the darkest part of the shading, which is what it read on here. And then we do our same thing. We just type in each coordinate. And that's not in the darkest shade. That's not in any shaded region at all. This is not in the darkest shaded region, so no. 1, 1. So this is on the edge of the shaded region, and it's a solid line. So they're the ones that I do include. 1, 3, it's in the wrong shaded region. That's not in the darkest shaded region, so we can ignore that. 3, -1, that's in the darkest shaded region, so I'll count that. 4, 3, that's in the darkest shaded region, so I will count that. And 6, 0, you can also see is clearly in the darkest shaded region, so I would accept that as well. So it's just knowing all those different rules, and you can actually check it. And this is what the original question actually looked like. This is one they recommended that students practice. And hopefully you can see that those 4 answers that we have here are the exact same 4 answers that we had on the other side. So they might give you as many as 7, and you might have to pick out which is the correct ones. And there was just all 4 of the answers together, just in one place, so you could see. That concludes the video. That's everything for the lock-in. Certainly go back and look at anything that you found a little bit more complicated, and certainly ask your teacher any questions that you might have from having watched this video.